Welcome to Travel Secrets with me, Tanya Rose, the podcast sharing wisdom for fellow travellers. Each week, I ask my guests to reveal their 6 travel secrets and the trips and holidays that uncover them. My guest today is my lovely friend Nick Allott. Nick is a British musical producer who has worked with Cameron Mackintosh for over 50 years, producing the original Cats, Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera, Hamilton, and many others. Nick has travelled extensively over his career, as well as growing up in Australia due to his father's army career, and he and I became firm friends, discussing our mutual love of musicals, Michael Ball, well, for me anyway.
And me too.
And travel. We usually find ourselves at the beginning of February each year at our beloved fasting clinic, Booking a Wilhelmie, where we can relax and reset our minds, bodies and souls for the year ahead. I'm sure today we will be inspired by his travel secrets, and I look forward to hearing more about where the best place to go for post-theatre dinner is, or perhaps even just hearing about you living on a hippie commune. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Tanya. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Perhaps before starting your travel secrets, you can tell us a little bit about travel and how it's impacted your life and who you are.
Well, I was very lucky to be born into an army family, which meant we were traveling constantly. I was born in England, but shortly after that, we started to move, as you do in the army, every 2 to 3 years. And like most army families, we went to Germany, somewhere else, Germany, Cyprus, Germany, Hong Kong, Germany, Australia, back and forth. So in the 50s and 60s, the British Army on the Rhine was still the big place to go in as a member of the army. The joy about traveling then was that the army never flew you anywhere on long haul. You would always go by ship. Oh. So I went out to Hong Kong on the Oriana and back, and out to Australia on the Oronsay and back, which is 6 weeks each time. So you can imagine, as a small child, that was the most extraordinary experience.
How wonderful.
Anyway, I spent a lot of my childhood in Australia. I was brought up there, and I went back in the early 70s in my gap year. Nearly didn't come back because I discovered a wonderful hippie colony called Nimbin, which was set up for a long weekend by the Australian Students' Union called Aquarius. And I understand is still there today, 40 years later.
Is it really? How amazing. Yeah. I can't imagine you on a hippie commune, but I sort of can.
Try and imagine me with hair, which is hard, and weighing a great deal less, and with a lot of enthusiasm. It was an incredible melting pot. It was a cultural melting pot. I chanted for the Radha Krishna temple because they gave you free food. I chanted for the Divine Light Mission because they had the prettiest girls. I met people from all over the world, and then as a result of that, you're handed on. I hitchhiked all over Australia for a year and a half. And as I say, I met this fantastic Spanish jeweler on the beach in Darwin who offered me an apprenticeship if I stayed. But like a steadfast English schoolboy, I had a place at university to come back to, which I came back to stupidly because I didn't last the course at university either.
You went to Exeter, didn't you?
I went to Exeter, which actually was a good thing to do, though the university wasn't particularly great. It had a campus theatre there called the Northcote, which is part of the Gulbenkian Foundation's experiment in the 60s and 70s to put theatres on campuses. And having dropped out of university with a loud report, I banged on their door every day. Each day they told me to disappear. And then finally one day they said, funnily enough, we've got someone who's called in sick. The ballet rumba are coming in. We need someone who can pull the ropes on the flies. Will you come and do it? And I'm glad to say I never looked back after that.
That's amazing. Did you ever want to be an actor, or were you always more on the sort of production side of things?
I wanted to be an actor, like every schoolboy or schoolgirl who falls in love with the theatre wanted to be an actor. I had an inspirational English teacher called David Summerscale, I can remember him now, who was a bit like a quiet version of Robin Williams, in that famous film. Yeah. And he was very much my mentor. He took me to the theatre in London. He directed some school plays. And when I left school, he sat me down and said, I'm going to ask you a question. I said, yes. He said, you want to be an actor, don't you? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And there was a pause, and he said, I'm afraid you're not good enough. And I went,
stab in the heart.
And he said, your voice isn't right. And I went, right, okay. He said, however, the good news is, he said, you're quite bright, you get on well with people, and there are many, many other jobs that you can do in the theatre. And it was the single best piece of advice, Tanya, I think I've ever had. Because all my acting friends, no matter how successful they are, spend large chunks of their life, not on the dole, but not working. And I, thank God, I'm about to be 70 and never been out of work for a day in my life.
Well, I'm very glad that you're not an actor, because where would we be in the West End and in Broadway without your wonderful shows that you've been putting on with Cameron for the past 50
listen,
years?
that's very kind of you. I'm sure the West End would be fine. The great thing about theatre producers, I've always say this, is they're a bit like cockroaches. They survive anything. And come the war, the people that will survive are theatre producers and cockroaches. No matter the hardship, they will find a way through. There's that great entrepreneurial spirit and that creative energy still that drives the British theatre forward. Still makes us the best in the world.
And thank goodness we've come out of lockdown.
We're getting back, actually. It took a couple of years. Funny enough, I was thinking about this the other day, talking to someone who said, "Oh, are you back with a bang?" I said, we weren't back with a bang, but suddenly before Christmas, everything started to come together again. There was a slew of 5-star reviews, from the pantomime at the Palladium to Macbeth at the Donmar to Stranger Things, that extraordinary adaptation of the television programme, to The Motive in the Queue, Sam Mendes' play that came in from the National Theatre. There's a lot of excitement. Witches at the National Theatre, which I'm going to go and see tonight. There's a lot of excitement back in the West End.
I saw Motive and Q on Friday. I have to say it's the best play I've ever seen.
Really?
I thought it was absolutely...
Isn't Mark Gatiss absolutely amazing?
Extraordinary. And also, I thought that Johnny Flynn was really good as Richard Burton, because he didn't do, I don't think, an impression of Richard Burton. I thought he just had his nuances. I thought he was fabulous.
Yeah.
Really good.
As a result of seeing that, I bought, or was given for Christmas, Erotic Vagrancy, the biography of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Oh my God, Tanya, it's a must.
Oh, I shall be reading that as I sit by the pool at the Column d'Or over Easter.
It's a big, big book, but it's written brilliantly, and it's not written like a conventional biography at all, but very, very carefully researched, all sorts of little nuances and tidbits.
Oh, lovely. Can't wait. I shall read that. That's on my travel secret
Erotic
book
Vagrancy.
list.
That and Rory Stewart's book about politics.
That's fantastic.
The two big tips I've got this year.
Thank you. Thank you to Antler for collaborating with us on the launch of Travel Secrets. Antler is the British travel brand for those who travel often since 1914. With over 100 years of travel expertise, Antler is renowned for designing and manufacturing quality luggage. Each suitcase embodies pioneering British design, combining innovation, function, and durability with a lifetime warranty. Explore Antler's latest collection at antler.co.uk. Let's go on to your travel secrets.
Yes.
So the first one, is there one place that you could recommend everyone visits at least once in their life? And if so, where is it and what? Tell me about it.
Okay, I thought about this quite carefully. I mean, obviously, if you're lucky enough to travel, you should travel as widely as you possibly can. But there's a reason, very specific reason, that I've chosen this place, and it's Antarctica.
Wow.
And I went to Antarctica in 1991, before the sort of widespread large cruise ship tourist experience was there. We went on quite a small boat. I was with Cameron and another friend. In 1991, it was a German-owned, American-run boat called the Explorer, which famously sank 4 years after we were on it. Sank in Antarctica. Yeah. Everyone was fine. They all survived. But it was one of the first small boats with twin steel hulls that was equipped for Antarctic travel. I think Antarctica, and I'm lucky enough, as I say, I've been up mountains, I've swum in almost every ocean I can think of, I've been across deserts. It's the only place in the world where I have felt completely at the mercy of nature. It's probably the most beautiful place I've ever been. I mean, the stark white and blue colours are, indescribable. And of course, you have to go there in what is their summer. So it's light for 23 hours a day, which is quite discombobulating, but again, very, very beautiful. I just sat there with my mouth open day after day after day. Of course, you've got the wildlife. You've got incredible wildlife. You've got, if you're lucky enough, you see whales, you see orca, you see seals of all shapes and sizes. And of course, famously, you see penguins. Millions and millions of penguins. You actually get quite fed up with penguins after a while.
That's another penguin.
The sheer numbers, the smell, the noise and everything, and boy, do they smell. But it's literally overwhelming, and treat it like a scientific mission. And we were lucky enough to have some really interesting lecturers on board. This was 91, so before people were really aware of climate change, global warming. The big issue at that point was the hole in the ozone layer. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
Absolutely.
And we were lectured about that. And the biggest hole in the ozone layer was above Antarctica. That, to a degree, has closed up, I'm told, because of the ban on hydrofluorocarbons. But though I'm told it's reopening again. But Antarctica now is a symbol of global warming because the ice shelf is melting, the icebergs are melting. It's responsible for something like 2/3 of the world's water is tied up in that ice sheet. And everyone needs to go and see it now and see
Wow.
for themselves the damage that's being done. And if that damage is irreversible, then you really need to give yourself the experience of seeing probably the last huge, great wilderness in the world. When I went there, you picked up a boat in Ushuaia, which is the southernmost tip of South America. You cross Drake's Passage, which is terrifying in itself because the waves are massive. And if you can survive without being seasick, you've got a pretty good stomach. But then you head south through the channels, and basically your route is determined by how far you can go down into what's called the Lemaire Channel. And the Lemaire Channel freezes up in the winter and opens up in the summer. And it's different every time.
And is it a week or 10 days? Or?
It's about, we were there for, I think, somewhere between 10 and 12 days. It's a fairly flexible trip if you can do it. You can extend it and go to South Georgia and go to the Falkland Islands as well, famously. However, this morning, in addition to the worry about climate change, I was horrified to hear that avian flu has been detected in some of the seals and walruses off South Georgia. And there's a very strong possibility that it might extend to the penguin population in the south. So there's an example of something that's not necessarily man-made, but hasn't been controlled by man, which could decimate that population because clearly they have no resistance to any virus like that. So another reason that we all need to be aware of it. And the great thing about Antarctica is it doesn't belong to anyone. It's its own continent. You can't own a piece of Antarctica. If you look at the maps, there's a slice of that the UK sort of lays claim to. And it interestingly overlaps with the slice that Argentina lays claim to as well. But they're never going to go to war over Antarctica. It's truly, truly beautiful.
It sounds absolutely wonderful. And I think what you're saying is so right. Go now.
Yeah.
Because it might not be there. And also go and really experience that what's going on with climate change.
If the only way to get there is on one of those big boats, then by all means go, because they treat it very responsibly. That's where I first learned the phrase, take only pictures, leave only footprints. I mean, they told us be so careful. If you step ashore on Antarctica and you see a little bit of moss, do not tread on that piece of moss. It's probably taken 30 to 40 years to establish itself.
Oh, wonderful.
But no, it's a trip I made that I'll never, ever forget.
I'm going to research the best small boat because I know there are these wonderful small boats.
Yeah.
And I think the lecturers are quite important as well, who the people are on the boats who are actually the lecturers. So that's going to be on my bucket list.
Good.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much. Let's move on to travel secret number 2. What's the most unexpected journey or place you've ever been to?
Okay, this is another unusual one. This took place in 1981, and it was unusual and unexpected because I made the mistake of believing a guidebook. A great friend of mine, she is now, I didn't know her very well then, is Jane Rice, Tim Rice's wife.
Oh, yeah.
And she was always in love with Africa. And she had decided, because she went there 2 or 3 times a year, she wanted to take her own car and leave it in Kenya. The way to do that then was to basically export her car via ferry to Alexandria, in the very northernmost tip of Egypt. And then she asked me to drive it with her down to Khartoum in the middle of Sudan. Oh, wow. She was going to do it in 2 bits. So we were going to do Alexandria to Khartoum. And then we all go home for Christmas, and then another friend of hers would do the Khartoum to Nairobi leg via Uganda. I was absolutely thrilled at this prospect. I was still sort of young and foolish.
Fun.
And I blocked out the time from my office to go on holiday then. And as I say, I believed absolutely. So the boat would arrive on such a day, the car would be here, it would take us this long to drive through Egypt, and then we'd go across Lake Nasser, and then we'd go to the Sudan, and then we'd drive across there, and we'd reach on such and such a date. No. The boat with the car arrived 10 days late. So which was a lovely opportunity to see Egypt properly, to be honest, because the shipping agent rather fell in love with Jane and the other girl who was with us called Biddy. And so they flirted with them endlessly to make sure that we were taken to the best possible places, and we got to climb the pyramids in the middle of the night and all that.
Oh, that sounds fun.
But where it started to come adrift was when the boat had arrived, and I knew we had 2 days to get the length of Egypt to get to Aswan, where we were going to pick up the 2:00 ferry on Thursday to go across the lake to Wadi Haifa, which is the entrance port into Sudan. The 2 tips we were told about driving in Egypt: you don't drive too fast, do not drive at night, because they like to look after their light bulbs, therefore they drive without their headlights on, and the last thing you see is a huge lorry bearing down when they flick the lights on in the middle of it. Also, the other thing, and this is sad, but I'm told true, is drive very, very slowly through the villages, because it's not unknown for impoverished families to chuck one of their younger members under your wheels for compensation.
Oh, my goodness.
So we did drive very slowly, and we got there, and I found the Egyptians charming and lovely and warm and welcoming. And we got to Aswan at the appointed time, and I heaved a huge sigh of relief to be met by a complete blank expression down on the harbour. The last ferry had been there probably 2.5, 3 months before. There was no scheduled ferry. They had no idea when there was going to be another one. And sorry, there was nothing they can do to help us. So Jane, being full of traveller's initiative, and I walked down to the harbour's edge, and she noticed a Sudanese cargo boat, which was piled high with buckets and spades and items of agricultural implements. And so with a lot of sign language, she made it clear that, could we have passage across? And they looked at the boat, and of course, every inch of deck space was taken up. So the dollars were produced. And
then they cleared
miraculously, about half a dozen people came and cleared it. And then we had to perform this incredibly delicate maneuver of driving the adapted Range Rover sideways onto the deck of this boat. And the nose hung over one side and the tail hung over the other. So it was just wide enough to get on.
Big enough.
Yeah.
How extraordinary.
So we locked it off as best we could and prayed that there wouldn't be rough weather, which there never was on Lake Nasser. And then had two of the most extraordinary days, I think, of my life. We befriended the crew. We sat with them every night and sat in a circle around a huge dish of food that they'd cooked. Made the mistake of almost eating with our left hand, a look of horror, because, of course, it's only with your right hand. But the really magical thing, which I wasn't expecting at all, again, such a clear, strong memory, was about halfway across. It just happened to be that we hit Abu Simbel at sunrise. And Abu Simbel is those massive temples on the western coast of Lake Nasser, just before it becomes Lake Nubia. And watching the sunrise on those things was just sitting there quietly, complete calm, not another boat in sight, was a truly, truly extraordinary experience.
That is the most unexpected trip. How
Totally.
Wonderful.
It became even more unexpected because when we got to Wadi Haifa, the entrance port to Sudan, to find it was a group of huts then, now I think it is actually a bustling community, I was armed with the Michelin road maps, which showed us the routes between Wadi Haifa and Khartoum. And we were driving for about, I'd say, 3 or 4 hours before we discovered the roads that were marked were wildly optimistically called roads.
Not a road at all?
No, they were tracks. And the tracks were largely obscured by the wind that had blown it across. So at that point, we knew we were navigating with a compass, which is not something I'd ever done before. Wow. And then, sort of rather nervous that we might be heading the wrong way, I decided to drive west until we found a railway track heading south. And I did know there was only one train a day, so I felt confident enough to drive our car up onto the railway track. And we just drove south on the railway track, bumping along until the train was coming the other direction. We quickly drive off and wait for it to go
Gosh,
past.
you're an intrepid traveller, Nick. I had no idea.
Young and foolish then, young and foolish. I'm not sure I'd do
Wow.
it now. Well, you can't do it now. Unfortunately,
No, you
all those
can't.
borders are closed. Those countries have
Absolutely.
been at war forever. We were very, very lucky, I think, to get in just before it became the trouble spot it is now.
Was Jane happy that she had her Range Rover where she wanted it to
She
be
was
at the end of
very,
the
very
day?
happy, but unfortunately the sad end to the story was the year after she had it, the friend of hers who was there on safari rolled the car and smashed it, and she was quite badly hurt, actually.
Oh, gosh.
Sadly, it
was
no
no longer
there.
Very exciting, though. How
Yeah.
wonderful. Let's talk about travel secret number 3. What's the most overrated travel experience you've ever had?
Overrated is quite a subjective word. It's quite a difficult word. Rather than overrated, I think the experience I had, which was the most disappointing in terms of my expectation, was in Vietnam in the early 90s. And I went there again in 1993, largely because we did a musical called Miss Saigon,
Absolutely.
which was set in Saigon in 1975 at the end of the war when the Americans were pushed out. And having made a big success of this musical in London and New York, we were opening a show in Singapore, which is right next door to Vietnam. And I thought, well, I should go and see this country that we've done this big show about, that we owe so much to. And at that time, there was no real tourism industry as such. Vietnam was still operating under what was called the hideously named Trading with the Enemy Act. So they weren't allowed to deal with the West. The Americans barred any kind of trade, still as a sort of revenge for the end of the war. So it was a very, very poor country. There weren't any really big hotels that we could find, and I was traveling independently. You couldn't travel totally independently. You had to log your trip with the Department of Tourism beforehand, and they appointed a guide to you in each place you went. And the guides were invariably young, very beautiful students learning languages who were so charming and shy, and in some cases, you got to know them, witty. They were absolutely wonderful. But I was really looking forward to seeing a bit of the ancient history of the country. And of course, the truth is, most of it was decimated. I went to Hue, which was the spiritual capital, the once great imperial capital of Vietnam, expecting to see these incredible temples, and was taken into what was effectively then a very, very large field with piles of stones in it.
Oh,
and they said this was where the imperial palace was.
Oh, really?
And it had been hit particularly hard in 1968, the Great Tet Offensive, when it had been bombed basically into the ground.
Oh, wow.
And everywhere I traveled in Vietnam after that, I found evidence of that. So there's a beautiful temple in the lake in the middle of Hanoi, the top half of which is absolutely stunning and wonderful woodwork and filigree work. And the bottom half is just concrete pillars.
Because it
And I
had
said,
been bombed.
why is that? Well, no, the French, not the Americans this time, the French had bombed it leaving Hanoi.
Oh,
I mean, just
really?
literally out of spite. There was no other reason for it. But the great thing about the people are unbelievably gracious. When you think what the West has done to them over a period of time, every time I walked through a village, there'd be, oh, and you'd hear, wait. And they'd wait and get the elder from the village, who was the one that spoke French. And they assumed I spoke French, so I spoke enough schoolboy French to get by. But
Bonjour.
every village I went into, I was asked in for tea. And when I thought what I represented in terms of the decimation to that country, the kindness and grace of those people. So they repealed the Trading with the Enemy Act in 91 while I was there.
Oh, did they?
Which was the most extraordinary experience because it was as if they'd won the war all over again.
Oh, really?
The cheering and dancing in the streets. And of course, from that moment on, rather like Thailand, the tourism business has expanded and there's Haman resorts.
Yes,
and,
there's some beautiful resorts there now.
very, very beautiful resorts, I'm told. I mean, I stayed in what was deemed to be the grandest hotel, which was an ex-army officer's hotel on the beach in Da Nang, called the Koc Dong, I seem to remember it was called. And it was, basic doesn't really begin to describe it, but again, the level of hospitality and the street food was wonderful.
Maybe you should go back now that they have actually got some lovely resorts.
I would love to. I've travelled quite extensively in the East, and I've been lucky enough to travel through Myanmar and Vietnam and Thailand, and obviously China a lot, and Japan and Korea. So I'd love to go back and see how it is.
See how it is now. But the people are lovely. And as you say, they open their arms to you even during that time. Amazing. Well, I've never been to Vietnam, but another one on my bucket list.
Yes.
Travel secret number 4, obviously food and wine and cocktails.
Food and wine.
We love. Tell me about your best meal or your best place to have dinner, pre-theatre, post-theatre. Just tell me about food and drink.
Okay, so as you know me very well, we're good friends. I'm very greedy and I love food. And I've had probably some of the finest meals one could ever hope to have over a period of time. And I'm lucky enough, because that was due to my dearest, sadly, late departed friend, Adrian Gill, A.A. Gill, who was the food critic for the Sunday Times.
He was indeed.
And I would more often than not go with him and accompany him on reviews. So ended up in fantastic places like El Bulli in Spain and obviously the Fat Duck and Noma in Helsinki. I mean, really extraordinary places. And in fact, he arranged, the finest meal I've ever had was in London. And it was for a story. I didn't know it was for a story. It was my birthday. And he said, just make sure you don't eat during the day and come with me. And what it was Marco P. White, who just got his 3rd Michelin star, who just opened the Oak Room in Meridian Hotel. It was for a supplement for the Sunday Times called The Best of. And Adrian had decided the best meal you could have would be one that was cooked for you personally by Marco P. White using only the world's finest ingredients.
How fabulous.
So caviar, foie gras, lobster, every single thing. I mean, it was exquisite. But if I'm really, really called to name one meal that I won't ever forget, it was not with Adrian, it was in memory of Adrian. Because he had been to a restaurant in Sweden called Fävike and written beautifully about it. His review is still available online.
I must read it, yeah.
Fävike. So a small group of us, including Nicola, his widow, decided to go back there as a memory for him. And it's very hard to get to, and you have to take a flight to Stockholm, then an internal flight, and then a long taxi ride. And there in the middle of the north of Sweden, tucked away on the edge of a lake, on the edge of a forest, is the most beautiful farmhouse you've ever seen, which kind of redefines the phrase hygge, you know, that thing about warm and cozy with thick white duvets and fireplaces and in these log cabins that you stay in, and you walk on the edge of the lake and you walk through the pine forest before dinner, and then you all come together into a communal dining room. And it's, 9, 10, 12 courses, I can't remember. It takes 4 hours. Under the watchful eye of the chef, who's a great Viking of a man called Magnus Nielsen. All the food was forage, apart from, I think, langoustine that had come from slightly further afield. Everything was in a 1 or 2 mile radius of his farmhouse.
How wonderful.
The most extraordinary food I've eaten. And very, very sadly, he closed it in 2019. He decided he wanted to move on. I mean, how you could make money there, I don't know. As I say, it's a day's travel either way to get there, and there were lots of beautiful and friendly, warm staff. But we were there and we drank a toast for Adrian, and it's the one that I think he probably would have enjoyed being with us most on.
Oh, he probably was with you.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was there spiritually with you. And is that chef gone on to doing
He's
anything
gone on.
else?
I'm not sure whether he's opened another restaurant or whether he's a consultant or he's just written books. I mean, he was this great bear of a man, and you sort of expected to be terrified, but he was actually very shy. And I don't know what he has gone on to do. I mean, look, being practical, because sadly, A, it's a long way away, and B, it's closed, so you can't go there anyway.
Go there.
I mean, closer to home, in London, almost for me, infallibly, before or after theatre, and I go to theatre a lot like you do. I was going 2 or 3 times a week before lockdown, maybe once or twice a week now. I would go to one of the Corbin and King chains. I'd go to the Wolseley or the Delaunay. It was the Ivy when they first had the Ivy. It was the Caprice, which, as we know, is about to reopen as the Arlington.
Yeah.
I mean, the food is not the best in the world, but it's certainly the best served. The ambience is wonderful. The customers are interesting. It's consistently reliable, and they treat you like a family.
I like everything on their menus too. I hate going to a restaurant when I look and think, what can I eat? There is nothing on their menus. I could eat anything on any of their menus.
And the great thing is, of course, Adrian was great friends with Jeremy King, and Adrian wrote the foreword to their cookbook. And Nicola, Adrian's widow, was charged with testing every single recipe in the cookbook.
Did she?
So she had to cook them all. So we would endlessly go around to our flat and have, it's Bang Bang Chicken tonight. Oh, it's the Shepherd's Pie tonight.
It's chapter 5.
But actually, the Ivy cookbook is still one of the most thumbed cookbooks on my bookshelf.
Is it? Wonderful. Another great tip. I shall be going out and looking for that. Yeah. Let's go on to travel secret number 5. What is your insider travel secret?
Well, as I say, I've travelled a lot. I've hitchhiked through large tracts of Australia. I've been lucky enough, courtesy of someone else, to fly first class, and I've flown in private planes. I've done lots and lots of different things. Over a period of time, you do develop your own tips. I mean, the first and most obvious one for me is don't drink on an aeroplane. Don't drink alcohol. Why? Just because you're served a glass of wine at 10 o'clock in the morning, would you accept it? But people do, and you watch them going, what are you doing? Unless you're going to bed when you get out the other end, you invariably feel rubbish. So don't. I mean, it's just a couple of hours in the plane. That's an obvious one. A less obvious one about flying was actually a tip given to me by a film producer, which is never judge the quality of a film that you watch in midair, because there's something about the pressurization of the cabin that affects your emotions, and it charges your emotions quite highly, which would explain why I find myself sobbing over otherwise really quite naff films across.
I watched The Kite Runner on a plane once, and I was in hysterics, and the actual lady came up to me, the stewardess, and she said, "Are you all right?" I think she thought I was having a convulsion.
Yeah.
And then I watched it again, and I thought, well, it's not quite as sad as it was when I saw it the first time.
Seeing it at 36,000 feet is a very different experience to seeing it at 30,000 feet.
I had no idea. That's really interesting.
Another sort of, for me, a general thing is about packing. And again, it's an obvious one. If you possibly can travel with hand luggage, God, it makes a difference at either end, and you're not stressed about it being lost. But if you do have to travel with check-in, what I do now is I pack everything I think I'm going to need, then I open it up again and take out 25%.
I wish I could do.
Invariably, you take too much. I bet you've never been anywhere in the world where you've actually used every single thing that's in your
half
case.
of it.
Yeah,
half
exactly.
of it. And it's always the shoes.
Yeah.
Why do I take so many shoes? I never use those shoes.
Well, that is a gender-based issue, I think.
Yes. I watch my friend Trini's packing tips over and over again. She is a master of packing hand luggage, and I still can't do it. In fact, I'm going to ask her to give me a lesson face to face. I think I might be able to learn something.
Those little packing slips that you get, I can't remember what they're called.
Yes,
where you
packing
can actually
boxes
pods
or whatever,
they are. They're fabulous.
Yeah, they're very good.
A very specific travel tip to me is, through my years with Cameron, obviously New York played a very big part of my life. We travel a lot, probably 3 or 4 times a year. And invariably, you feel knackered when you get there. And I learned fairly early on, because when I'm there, I cram in as many shows as I possibly can. Do not go to the theatre the first night you're there, because you will fall asleep. I mean, I have a propensity to fall asleep in a warm auditorium anyway. It could be rock and roll, could be film, could be theatre. It's a standard Allott family joke that, watch Daddy's going to have a little kip in the first half, and then I have to try to work out what's happening in the second. But the sleep that I would have in a Broadway theatre on the first night in New York was longer than usual. So that was true until I was introduced by a delightful, mad English friend of mine who lives in New York, who looks a little bit and behaves a little bit like Billy Bunter. And he said, what you need, my dear, is you need to come to the Russian and Turkish baths. And the Russian and Turkish baths on East 10th Street are amazing. It's like a step back in time. It's like every gangster movie you've ever seen. Monday and Tuesday are what they call co-ed, so mixed gender. You're not allowed to wear your own kit. You're given the most ghastly, sort of soggy canvas shorts that you put on, and the ladies have their own equivalent of it, which is 2 bits. And you're sitting there amongst some of the biggest, fattest, hairiest men you've ever seen in your life, sitting side by side with some of the most beautiful women who are clearly the gangsters' moles who are sitting there. And the heat in this place is absolutely incredible. And the water is literally icy cold. You almost suspect you're going to be breaking ice. How you don't have cardiac arrest, I don't know. And then if you're really hardcore, it took me 2 or 3 trips before I would brave this. You'll have someone flog you with oak branches. And why it has to be oak, I don't know, but oak leaves and branches, and you get whipped within an inch of your life. But you come out feeling $1 million.
And then you can go to the theatre.
Then you
because
can go
you're not going to fall asleep.
Yeah, you've cracked your jet lag.
Where is that?
It's on East 10th Street. I can't
10th.
remember what the avenue is, but it's down the village. If you just Google Russian and Turkish baths and you look at it, and as I say, it's stepping back in time.
Oh, I'm going to try it. I'm not sure that I'll be going for the whipping, but maybe the 3rd time I might get to that.
Make sure you go in company and you'll feel stronger afterwards.
That sounds fantastic. So travel secret number 6, what memory of a holiday is still poignant with you now?
I've had many, because travel is so much about people and people that you travel with, and going back to places that people maybe that aren't there anymore. But the one that affected me emotionally most, and I can still conjure up that feeling, was again completely unexpected. I was staying with some very dear friends in the Exumas, which is a beautiful little chain of islands running through the Bahamas. And we'd been there for 10 days, and the most beautiful, lovely beach holiday. And they had 2 little guest cottages on the beach. And it was our last day, and we were packing to go very sadly. And I heard this terrible shriek from the cottage next door from a friend of mine. And he said, Nick, come in quickly. And he'd found this big snake in one of the drawers of the chest of drawers that he was unpacking. Heroically, we called for the manager of the island, who came down, very nice man, and he picked it up. I said, don't worry, look, it's a rock python or whatever it was, but it's quite big. He said it's harmless and it's clearly eaten and it's very sleepy. So draped it around the children's necks, and we all picked it and handled it, and it was beautiful and slow and docile. But he said, okay, now I think we need to let it go off and finish its lunch. And we put it down on the edge of the jungle, and it didn't move. It started to sort of arch its back and sort of flex its body muscles and things like that. And we watched it do that. He said, oh, look, it's obviously eaten a mouse. This is exciting. You don't often see that. And we watched it, and quite clearly it wasn't making any progress. And he said, I think it's got a problem here.
Oh, no.
So he said, Nick, you pick it up, and I'll
thanks.
open its jaws, and we'll have a look in. And I did, and he prized open its jaws, and there was something really brightly coloured. And he thought, I don't know what that is, what sort of bird that is. And so he got a little stick, and he hauled it out, and it was a pair of my friend's knickers. It was lycra, brightly coloured knickers, which this poor snake had seen.
Couldn't digest.
And eat, and clearly couldn't digest
that's-
it. Those knickers are still on the wall of the museum.
I was going to say, I
Bohemian
hope
Museum.
that they
Yeah.
framed them. That's hilarious.
But that wasn't the great emotional experience, obviously. As we were packing, ready to go just after that, roaring with laughter, a call came over the shortwave radio saying that another boat had seen a pod of whales 20 miles off the island. So he said, quick, jump in the boat. You don't often see this. And we shot off in the speedboat, just the 2 families. And there they were. And I don't know what possessed me, because I'm not heroic in any way at all, but I suddenly thought, I've got to get in with them. So I grabbed a mask and a snorkel, and John, the manager, said, wait. But I was in, and I swam towards them without thinking anything. And it was only really halfway across, I thought, A, this is probably not the smartest thing I've ever done, but B, I was swimming over probably one of the deepest water trenches, probably 1,000 meters, something like that.
Oh, my goodness.
That was an extraordinary feeling. But then as I got close to them, I realized, okay, not too close. There were about 12 or 13, and there were 2 calves.
And
the
that's
mothers.
when they're very
You
protective.
could see them looking at you out of their eye, corner of their eye. And I sort of swam alongside. They swam sort of slowly. And it sounds not ridiculous, but it was this extraordinary feeling of, I don't know, sort of spiritual bond. I'm sure they didn't feel it, but I did.
How
To be in the
amazing.
presence of this majesty. And we swam along, and then every now and again they'd dive, and you watch them dive deeper and deeper and deeper through this incredible blue water till they disappeared. Then you get back on the boat, and you'd wait for them to sound again, maybe half a mile further on, and then we'd take the boat up and I'd get in again. And then a couple of the other people did. And
I was going to say, did anyone else join you?
They did. And then the children, who were quite small, got in, and we put their water wings on and got them quite near. But by the time there were 4 or 5 in them, the whales were quite clearly pissed off with us at that point. So off they went and didn't go. But a lot of people have been lucky enough to go whale watching. And I've done it since with my sons in Australia on a small sailing boat, just the 3 of us on a migratory path of humpback whales. But
you actually swam
nothing
with
really came close to actually swimming with them.
I actually haven't heard of anyone swimming with them. I've heard of people swimming with dolphins.
Swim with dolphins, yeah. And obviously you can get much closer to dolphins there. But to be that close up, not wearing a wetsuit or tanks or anything like that, just swimming on the surface, was a truly, truly emotional and deeply moving experience.
How wonderful. That sounds incredible. Now, I asked you to bring a photograph.
Yes.
Can you show us the photograph and tell us what that photograph means to you and how it sort of sums up travel for you?
I've cheated, I'm afraid, because I've got 2 photographs, but they were taken in the same country on the same day. And for me, the contrast in them sums up what travel is all about.
Wonderful.
And these were taken in 2015 on a trip to Myanmar in the brief window that you could actually travel to Myanmar. So the first one, I was walking down the street and I saw these 2 beautiful young men who were young Buddhist monks, sort of 10 or 11. And they were so calm and graceful. And I sort of squatted down and looked at them and they smiled. And I did, the international sign, can I take your picture? And they just nodded and they linked arms. And you can see their face completely impassive. They weren't posing or anything like that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely extraordinary. They were really, really wonderful. And so we travelled on. Now, this was, I should explain, in the very brief window when Aung San Suu Kyi had been released from house arrest and she was running for the leader of the country. And so we were there during the electioneering. And I woke up in the boat that we were staying in one morning to hear cheering and hooting and everything like that. And this boat came past and it was her campaign. And the excitement and thrill of these people that, she was going to take over. And indeed, of course, she did. And I thought the contrast between that and the stillness and the deep religion of the young monks and then this sort of real excitement, this political excitement. And of course, she became leader. And I was lucky enough to meet her when she came here through my mother-in-law. And tragically, of course, she's now completely discredited. But it was great. I mean, Myanmar was, again, the most incredible place. It was almost medieval in terms of some of the villages we went. Again, warm, curious people. Their temples are beautifully preserved.
Yes.
They weren't bombed in the way that Vietnam was. Again, if you haven't been, put it on your bucket list.
The Peninsula Hotel Group were going to open next year, but obviously that's all been postponed. They can't, but they've still got the building, which is a really traditional, lovely building. And I'm sure they're very long-termist anyway in their outlook. I'm sure
I'm sure the wheel will come full circle, and their economy can't survive on the way it is at the moment, and they will go back. I think obviously they've got a huge population with the Rohingya issue that they need to resolve before the world will accept them back into the community, the global community. But its potential for tourism is massive. I had been, funny enough, once before, lucky enough to be on a friend's sailing boat, and we sailed up the west coast of Burma. And before we went, we were told we had to negotiate with the Ministry for Tourism. Because we were staying on a boat, we had to pay them $5,000 to compensate them for the loss of revenue for the hotels that we wouldn't be staying in.
Oh, really?
It's only afterwards we discovered there weren't any hotels.
There weren't any?
Anyway, it was a price. It was a price worth paying.
Oh, Nick, thank you so much. What a joy. Probably one of the most well-travelled people I know. And
Tanya,
so lovely to hear all your travel secrets and spending time chatting. Thank you so much.
It was a great pleasure. Always a joy to see you and lovely to be able to conjure up some great memories.
Thank you.